Okay. Well, good afternoon. I welcome you all for the second live session for this NPTEL MOOCs course on Ecology and Society. What I do now is give a brief discussion on what we have covered in the last few weeks. And meanwhile, you all can join and then post questions on the chat box, and I'll try to respond them as we go along with the discussion. The fourth week, we have delved upon the themes on conceptions of natures or contested domains and boundaries of culture. And in this, we try to look at the nature-society interface by reimagining from the perspective of ecological anthropology. And we also try to situate the notions of this relation between human and environment. We also look into some of the social practice which is embedded in the symbolic ecology, that is how people engage in talking about and interacting with their physical environment. Now, when we talk about or use the very term called symbolic in anthropology, it tries to draw our attention in terms of looking at the native cosmologies, which does not simply appear to classify their components in conformity with the rules and domain of this specificity. We have also discussed about the binary oppositions which is present between the natural and the supernatural, where Durkheim tried to argue the idea of this supernatural order, which is derived from the idea of a natural order or things. So we have also looked into how this materialist approach within the domain of cultural ecology and Marxist anthropology does not necessarily subscribe or agree to what Durkheim has to say about. And we have also looked into the modes of identification, that is how the anthropologist tries to reconstruct these mostly to do with the non-verbal mental models or practices from all sorts of apparently trifling acts which are being woven together so as to produce a meaningful pattern. So therefore, there emerges modes of identification which are defined with the defined boundaries between self and others. So we also have these notions of totemic expressions as well as the anemic systems. So in most, for example, in totemic systems, non-humans are mostly treated as signs. In anemic systems, they are treated as the term of a relation. So therefore, totemic systems are more or less based on this idea of segmentary organizations. We have also looked into the notions of naturalism by engaging with the works of Latour, which argues the way in which there is an increased artificializations of nature, and how modes of categorizations are taking place, and how we then move on to looking at the contested domains and boundaries of culture by seeing from the vantage point of the human evolutionary ecology, and by giving examples of the foraging behavior of human hunter-gatherer society, where it is being questioned that is the human hunter-gatherer a version of economic man or a species of optimal for it. So this rationality of human hunter-gatherers by comparison with that of the non-human counterparts is compromised by various social and cultural constraints, and therefore there is notion which develop which is called as culture and choice. And then I have also highlighted about the examples of the Cree people of in northern Ontario, how the Cree hunter is very unlikely ever to encounter the same conditions from one year to the next. So therefore, hunters are more or less being encountered by certain kinds of choices that this pattern in fact changes in response to alterations in the parameters of hunting which are brought about, for example, by the introductions of new technology. So therefore, there is the behavioral changes which is mostly influenced by the natural selection. So far as these non-human animals are concerned, it also tries to see whatever the merits of these assumptions once our attention turns to human beings. So the Cree hunter is described as having made a number of decisions whether to shoot these animals or which are being passed on to the model which necessarily implies the autonomy in terms of the decision making, which is extremely part of the individual restricted options which are being given by to the individuals as well as the group. So there's also a classic debate in terms of how the economic anthropology between the formalism and substantivism has been operated. So this is being mostly explained by taking the views which is being propagated by Max Weber, that is the distinctions between the formal and the substantive aspects of human rationality. So going by this, the Cree hunter actually received wisdom of his cultural heritage, far from underwriting his ability to come up with an effective strategy. And for example, the older hunters were strongly committed to the traditional idea of spreading their effort across a range of species, and which continue to practice a broad spectrum style of hunting even when the availability of specific presence of other animals. So therefore, the question which arises that whether the Cree hunters' choice are real or metaphorical. On the other hand, the hunter's behavior also follows certain kinds of strategy that has evolved through a process of natural selection. Thus, we can see that in this, there is also a development of what the term which is called, whether it's enculturations or it is enskillment. So therefore, there's this contrasting forms of learning, which are of course whether it's social or maybe it's individual. To what extent it is being culturally transmitted, and how learning technical skills appears to actually depend on what might be possibly called as the technology acquisition support system. So therefore, there is a presence of observations, imitations, and so on and so forth, how this technology in some sense has evolved over a period of time possibly among the hunter-gatherers. So we then also, move on to discussing about some of the paradigms in human environmental relations, and in that we took up three particular concepts, that is Orientalism, paternalism, and communalism. So we began trying to give a distinction between nature and society, that is how a key constructs of modernist discourse from various perspectives, and one of them is the Marxian approach, which usually restricted to human relations in terms of making sense of the human environmental relations. So these three paradigms, if you looked at the paradigm of communalism, actually differs from the other two, that is Orientalism and paternalism, that it rejects the radical separations of nature and society, whereas the way in which nature-society relationship evolve over time, that is in the medieval period. I received some sages. They said that they have some difficulties. Where's the chat? It could be with the other thing. Anyway. So this nature-society interface in the context of the medieval period, to a large extent, is something to do with indivisibility, because there is a notions of how the individual does not mean that an individual has to be separated from the society, but they are very much embedded within the society. So one can actually look into the way in which how this the contrast between the dominations and protection, that is how environmental Orientalism, to a large extent, suggests that there is a negative reciprocity in terms of the human environmental relations, whereas paternalism tries to imply that there is a balanced reciprocity presupposing human responsibility. So the third paradigm, that is communalism, emerges out of rejecting these radical separations of nature and society, and also this particular paradigm suggests that there is a generalized reciprocity in human environmental relations, which invoke the notions of contingency, participation, and dialogue. So therefore, there is an analogies which are being drawn between the human world and the natural environment, and therefore humans are perceived to be often treated other than human beings and the environment in similar manner. So therefore, there is a metaphorical associations which are drawn upon the language of personal relatedness. It could be kinship, and even the sexual relationship which are being seen here. Now, if one may look at the Orientalist exploitation, this paradigm, to a large extent, does not simply establishes a fundamental break between nature and society per se, but it also suggests that people are masters of nature, which are typically in charge of the world. Now, many of the Orientalist ethnographers colonize the reality that they are studying in terms of universalist discourse, which assert the superiority of their own society in relation to that of the native. So given that anthropology was perceived as the offsprings of colonialism, that is the predominance of the objectivist and orientalist, which extends over a long period in the history of relations. So many examples of such industrial exploitations of the wild, that is the undomesticated species, illustrate the characteristic of this environmental orientalism. So there are a couple of examples when we discuss about paternalism and then the academic discourse on textual translation, that how the peasants often seem to think of the human environmental relations in terms of protections and reciprocity. And we also have a look at some of the examples concerning the fishermen who have become increasingly dominated by the techno-scientific knowledge and the agencies of the state. So in a nutshell, we can say that within the moral framework of paternalism, people are aware of this ecological consequence of their actions, and they seek to organize themselves to redress the balance, the metaphor, and the, which seems to be appropriate in nature. So therefore, one could see that communalism, and then mostly by the anthropology and ethnographic fieldwork, may be characterized as a project in which the anthropologists and their host engage in meaningful or maybe in a reciprocal enterprise. So we have also looked into some of the works of Bert David, which tries to show how many groups of these hunters and gatherers metaphorically extend the communalism of relations among humans to the realm of environmental relations, thereby projecting an image of the giving environment. So more or less, we have also looked into the hunting activities among the Canadian Cree, which are frequently perceived to be love affairs where hunters and their prey seduce each other, and hunters must enter into a relationship with game animals in order to have any success, and vice versa. So in other words, we can say that to have a fruitful hunting spree, to kill an animal is to engage in a dialogue with an inhabitant of the same world. Animals are perceived as social persons, and humans are perceived as part of nature. So in the hunter's view, there is no fundamental distinctions between nature and society per se. So we have also looked into the way in which these relations to land and the economy of livelihood, and therefore exploring the spirit of communalism, and so on and so forth. So then we move on to try to familiarize ourselves with some of the important concepts such as nature, culture, magic, and science, how this relationship between people and their environment, particularly by engaging with this conceptual dualism of nature and culture, how nature culture dualism forms part of the Western ethno-epistemology. So these concepts, particularly magic and science, are investigated with particular reference to their dualist usage in anthropological discourse and to a wider philosophical debate. So this presumed dualism of nature and culture, some scholars, particularly like Stratton and Wagner, argue that there is no such thing as nature or culture, because it is Each of these is a highly relativized concept whose ultimate signification must be derived from its place within a specific metaphysics. So witchcraft, magic, and oracles are, being defined by looking at the works of the Evans Pritchard among the Jande community. So there is a different notions altogether that is depending on the positionality which is being taken by the researcher, that is the anthropologist, that is the emimetic distinctions, particularly in the domain of the ethnoscience. What, for example, what ethnoecology has to do with, for example, pertaining to the study of the indigenous knowledge of natural resources and their exploitation, with the prefix of this ethno, which perhaps indicates that the specific field of knowledge is that of the observed rather than the observer. So therefore, when we discuss all this, whether dissecting the concept like ethnoecology or others, there is a cultural meaning which is seen to be interacting with the laws that regulate nature. So, for example, Evans Pritchard's view on the agenda witchcraft, that is, ethnoecology, is likely to presuppose the existence of a context independent reality against which the rationality of indigenous ecological knowledge may be evaluated. So going on from the ontological constructs in which the dualism of this nature and culture dominates, the conventional study of ethnoecology tends to imply that a subjective grid of culture is imposed upon the objective reality of nature. So methodologically, we can say that this approach generates much information in terms of how these environmental processes and relations are perceived by the people who are being in question. So therefore, there are many studies of indigenous ecological knowledge which have emerged, and which also tries to look into the nature of how these classifications and naming of animals and plants, mostly among the non-literate traditional peoples, to a large extent has to reflect similarities in people's largely unconscious appreciations of nature's basic plant. So we have also looked into some of the alternative epistemologies by looking into the Moravo Lagoon community, mostly confined in the Solomon Islands, the ontological premises prevailing among them, wherein they hold that organisms and the non-living components of the environment are subsumed in the concept which is largely called as Puawa, that is the land and sea territory and all things therein. So we have certain dimensions like the tame and the wild and tame dimensions, which try to illustrate some of the Moravo epistemology. So such indigenous notions of the constructions try to validate and transmit some forms of practical utility of knowledge about the environment and pose a number of challenges to this anthropological analysis. So we can see in that discussion how the Moravo people's relationship with the environment appear not necessarily constrained by the laws of nature. So therefore, it is also interesting to see how this community has, thrived despite all odds and then challenges within their given environment. So in our discussion, we have also touched upon how religion, nature, and environment uh, uh, are interrelated and intersect. And largely, we look at the works of Roy Rappaport, which are mostly taken from his book, Ritual and Religion in the Making of Humanity. So Roy Rappaport give a rigorous and explicit attention to ritual because he considered that uh, the human, that religion which are founded on a postmodern science, which are grounded in ecology rather than astronomy, so that human society must be conceived of as being inside rather than outside life of this planet. So it looks at the evolutions of human society, particularly how animals communicate and even plants receive and transmit information, but only humans, so far as we know, are possessed of language, particularly symbols, signs, and so on and so forth. So with these symbolic transmissions, human individuals can learn from the accounts of others, as well as from their own direct experience, and also this learning will be transformed in a mere recounting into public knowledge. So adaptation is also one of the important points which is pointed out by Roy Rappaport, and the other is the symbol and the ritual formed according to Rappaport to a large extent denote the performance of more or less invariant sequences of formal acts and utterances not entirely encoded by the performers. So rituals is often taken to be perceived to be a symbolic form that is the significance of the observation that definitions of ritual is formal. And for instance, the marine ritual cycle constituted a functional ecological theory of rituals in general. So therefore, rituals and ceremonies plays a very important role in terms of the way in which humans have shaped their environment, and which is also used as a medium of enactments of meaning. That is how they make sense of their physical environment and how their belief and adaptations have been regulated over a period of time. So therefore, the ritual cycles of the Sembega community, as explained by Roy Rappaport, plays an important part in regulating the relationship of this group with both the non-human components of their immediate environment and the human components of their less immediate environments. So therefore, ritual regulations, in a sense, help to maintain the biotic communities existing within their territories, redistributes land among people and people over land, and limits the frequency of fighting and so on and so forth. So next, we begin looking at how religion plays an important role in the context of the environmental crisis, which are largely, confronted by human beings, and why for quite some time religion does not, or is not rather given a space when it comes to talking and discussing about the solution to environmental crisis and so on and so forth. One of the main issue of this was particularly because there is a fear that the bringing religion into the environmental movement perhaps will threaten the objectivity, scientific investigation, professionalism, or even the democratic values might be at threat. So these doubts lead some people to a complete rejections of religion. And but on the other hand, it is also important to realize that historically religions have taught us to perceive and also to act on the non-human nature in terms of a particular human interest, belief, and social structures. So therefore, one of the main questions which we have tried to address and looked at is how has religion shaped our understanding of and our conduct towards nature, and to what extent the environmental crisis challenge and transform this modern technology, theology, and spiritual practice. So therefore, some eco-theologians has started to sought to reinterpret the old traditions in terms of solving some of the current crisis. So therefore, the spiritual dimension, that is the spiritual perspective, can be a source of social direction as well as personal inspirations. So based on some of the works, particularly by Lin White Jr., that is by based on his essay that is titled "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." It tries to look into how science and technology together have create some kind of an important theoretical and empirical approaches to our natural environment, and how science was initially perceived to be traditionally aristocratic, speculative, and intellectual intent. So the fusion of science and technology, particularly in the middle of the 19th century, tended to assert a functional unity of brain and hand. And perhaps our ecological crisis, as Lin White Jr. would argue, is the product of an emerging entirely novel democratic culture. So therefore, the Western traditions of technology and science are perceived to be distinctively Occidental, and how nature is being perceived in the medieval period, that is the man's relationship to soil was profoundly changed as human society has evolved over a period of time. And one of the main seminal thing which happened was the victory of Christianity over paganism was the greatest psychic revolution in the history of our culture. That is what Christianity has, and implications on human relationship with the environment. So therefore, we have also looked into how this perception, that is the Christian worldview, have shaped our imagination. That is, what we do about our ecology depends on our ideas of the man-nature relationship. And we then move on to look into some of the Asian religions, particularly biodiversity conservation ethics in Buddhism. So we have looked at some of the religious texts like the Jataka, which tries to give a vivid account about the stories of how man in early period tends to share a very cordial and harmonious relationship with nature, and how the early Buddhist community live in the forest, and they have been following certain kinds of rules and principles, that is the moral guiding principles of do's and don'ts in terms of where they strictly engage in following the precept of Buddhism and so on and so forth. So therefore, they have a very strong guiding principle with regards to water conservations and so on and so forth. And then we move on to how nature conservation is being highly evoked in the religious texts of Hinduism, where religion can provide different examples to human society in terms of dealing with the ecological crisis. the sanctity of life in the Ayurveda to a large extent also talks about how uh, the relationship between the human and nature has been there. So one of the main ideas which is being perceived from this is the doctrine of ahimsa, that is where there is a strong emphasis on the notion that God's grace can be received by not killing his creatures or harming his uh, creation. So therefore there is the passage of Rig Veda and so on and so forth. You have respect for flora, and the cutting of trees and destructions of flora were also perceived to be a sinful act. And certain passages on the water pollution has also been discussed. And we then move on to looking at the Bisnoise communities, who are the living examples of how they have conserved nature to a large extent. And we then looked at how the Pope John Paul comes up with a universal appeal where the ecological crisis needs to be addressed, and he also give a clarion call of a common responsibility, where God made the images in the likeness of God, and then how the alienation which was being created by the first human in the biblical references of Adam and Eve. So that needs to be deconstructed and then re-established. So all what has been gone wrong needs to be re-established. So therefore, one needs to have a respect for life, and then one needs to establish a peaceful society. So therefore, no peaceful society can afford to neglect either respect for life or the fact that there is an integrity to creation. So therefore, there is an urgent need for solidarity. That is, the ecological crisis reveals the urgent moral need for a new solidarity, especially in relations between the developing nations and those that are highly industrialized. So therefore, it is interesting to see that the Pope John Paul, despite where Christian religion at one point of time is perceived to be anthropocentric in nature and blamed for the ecological crisis, and he has made encompass and goes beyond that to sort of bring and discuss all this to re-establish and bring changes. So some queries were there concerning the modalities of these exams. The weightage, of course, as for the final exam is 75, and then the rest would be covered from the weekly assignment. So I once again request you all to sincerely submit the weekly assignment because we have 25% based on that. So other than that, we have that 75 marks from the final exam, and which are mostly covered here. I mean, in the lectures, as well as the reading notes, which are being the lecture slides which are being uploaded. So other than that, you don't really require an extra reading. So that would really suffice for the final exam. So thank you once again for enrolling for this particular course. And I do hope to, if you have any doubt, and if in future you please drop in and write to me, and then I'll try to attend to those queries. Thank you so much. Have a good day.